I am so excited today. I've done a like butt ton of podcasts already, and I think Hilleberg Tents is probably like on the top of my list of brands I wanted to talk to because I am such a big fan of Hilleberg. I always go back to Hilleberg. I own everyone who listens to this podcast knows that I own like I don't even know 15 or 20 tents, and I always go back to my Hilleberg because it just works. But I'm so excited to have Petra Hilleberg on today to talk about tents. How you
Yes,
doing?
good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So I was kind of telling Petra off air that I own two Hilleberg tents. I'll probably pick up one of their single person tents as well. I own your Namaj, which is like a 4 season, 3 person tent with the big GT vestibule. That's kind of like my expedition tent. If I'm flying in somewhere, that's my tent I'm going to use. It's a bomb proof shelter. It's like a tent that you could bring to Everest, correct?
Yes.
I mean, and then my kind of the tent that I always go back to is I have your Nalo 2 person tent. And I think it weighs like 4 or 5 pounds all in. I split the poles up and everything and bring it down. But even though I know you guys claim it's a 3 season, I've had that thing in stuff it shouldn't be in and when it shouldn't be in. And it's just always kept me safe.
Yeah. So the Nala is actually an all-season tent as well.
Is it?
It's just in our red label line. So what we did a few years ago in order to help people kind of sort through, because we have a lot of models, we have about close to 30 different models. So in order to help people sort out, so like you said, your Namach is in our black label line.
Okay.
That's it doesn't, it obviously, yes, it means expedition, but it also means that it is our strongest materials and thickest pole diameter, but also the poles have the same length and the vents are larger, higher up. Mesh panels are larger and covered as well. So it just means that they're more suited for extreme weather. It's a lot of North and South Pole expeditions will take them pretty much standard on the poles, and expeditions in general, like longer hunts that are, like you said, where you're kind of stuck for a longer time. And then we have our red label, and they're still all season tents. So our
Mhm.
definition of what is a all season or a 4 season tent is that obviously that they're strong enough for the weather, but also that the outer tents go all the way down to the ground so that you don't have snow, but also or sand or wind coming in underneath the tent. Also that the vents are high up so that if it's covered with snow, that you still have the venting. And then also that all mesh panels can be covered by a fabric panel so you don't have, again, snow or sand coming inside the tent. So the red labels also have that, but they're a little bit lighter. So they have still our Carolyn 1200 fabric, which is still, it's still very, very strong fabric. It has about a 12 kilo tear strength, which most tents that you find on the market have around a 2 kilo tear strength. So still very, very strong.
Mhm.
Like you said, you can still take it out in pretty much anything. And but then the poles might be a little bit different length so that you save a little bit of weight. So compared to, if you look at the Namach and the Nalo, they're fairly similar, but the Nalo is lighter because of the some of the features having been made to be lighter, but still strong enough to be all season. And then we have our yellow label, which is our 3 season, or we like to call them snow free times of the year. The same thing. We try to talk about all season instead of 4 season, because usually when people hear 4 season, they think about snow only and heavy, and that's
Mhm.
not the case for ours. So the yellow labels are for the snow-free times of year because the outer tents don't necessarily go all the way down to the ground, and the mesh panels are not being covered. So I know some guys that use them for their hunts, even in the shoulder season, and some in the winter, but then they're going to be a lot colder because the mesh panels are not covered, and you might get some snowdrift underneath them, but they're still pretty strong. They have the same poles as the red labels. We tried them with a different pole to make them lighter, but the difference with the lighter pole in the strength was so it was so significant that we did not feel like it was worth it
Mhm.
to save the weight.
Now, yes, there are tents out there that are ultra light, like, REI tents. Let's call them REI tents. But as a hunter who typically is packing into places you shouldn't be going, where animals are, um, I just know that when I bring a Hilleberg, I'm gonna be safe. I'm gonna be okay with my children. I've been in situations where other tents have been blown apart, like winds in there. I mean, like I like a floorless tent a little bit sometimes, but uh man, I've had times where the TP has gone away and I'm in my Hilleberg and it sounds like someone's just beating the walls with sticks just with wind, and me and my son are totally fine. Well, my other son and my buddy are out in the rain getting pelted at 2 in the morning trying to put their tent back together. Um, and it's so important for me on a hunt like that, like the weight consequence of a little bit heavier tent, but like you said, like, oh, those poles weren't strong enough is so important to me because there's nothing that's going to ruin a hunt when you're 8 miles back or 10 miles back more than your shelter being destroyed or
Yeah.
you being wet.
Yeah. But I think that what you said, like, being in places you shouldn't be, we feel like there really aren't any places you shouldn't be. You
There
should
you
be
go.
able to go where you want,
Yeah.
and that's kind of our focus. We only make tents, so we specialize in tents. I feel like you can't be good at everything, so every little detail that you see on the tents are there for a reason. Like we test them for so long that it's uh, yeah, we're very slow because we do so much testing, and also like we don't change things out just to be on trend or to
Mhm.
if you look at our flagship tent, the Caron, which is our black label, we've had it since I think it was introduced in 1980.
Mhm.
And yes, if you look at a Caron from 1980 and a Caron from today, they look very different because every detail has been improved on it. But
Mhm.
it's still the same tent. You can see it's still the same tent. So we obviously do work on new models, but we also constantly improve our current models, our existing models. So we spend almost as much in our developing team on looking at existing models and making sure that they are as good as they can be. So
And I can say too with your tents, because a lot of times a big thing right now is obviously going to stoves and going floorless. Your tents are warmer. Your tents are warmer than my other tents. They're double wall that goes all the way to the ground. It doesn't allow that wind gust in there. Why are your tents warmer?
I think again, it's what you said. Like we have in our all season tents, our black and red label, the outer tent goes all the way down to the ground, and we rely on the venting and the vents that are higher up. It's also an exceptionally waterproof fabric, and also with that comes it's a very very windproof fabric. And then we have the two layers, and we have a certain distance between the inner and outer tents at all
Mhm.
times, so that you get it is warmer that way. It's also very strong floors. We have high bathtubs. So everything to protect you from the weather, but the consequence is that it's warmer. But at the same time, you can open them up really well, so you can use them in the summer as well or in hotter seasons. So that's why again we want to talk about all season rather than four season because they can be used in both. Um, we do have we have our Altai, which is our group tent. That is a floorless um, group shelter. It's kind of more of a yurt style. So you have
Mhm.
the teepees kind of you lose a lot of space on the sides because of the
Mhm.
angle. So we have it use trekking poles or the poles that you can get with the tent. So you have higher sitting height on the sides. So
Mhm.
that's a really cool roomy option that is gives you a lot more space than a straight teepee would. So for a group shelter, and we do have inner tents for it as well. But that's kind of a cool lightweight for the size of it. Um,
Yeah. So I want to go back to tents, but I kind of want to keep going in the history of your company as well. So when you talked about that tent with the yurt style, I am a fanboy. Like, just know that. Like, I'm a fanboy. And I remember seeing something where you guys take out your employees because you guys are from Switzerland
Sweden.
and Sweden. I'm sorry, Sweden. Oh, don't want to offend you. Sorry, Sweden, Sweden. Um, okay, you're from Sweden, and I remember seeing you guys go out as like a company and bringing out vendors and bringing out those yurt style tents and bringing them out like because you guys will go That's the Swiss Alps. That's snow. That's
The
cold.
Swedish
That's
mountains,
yeah,
yes. Not the Swiss Alps.
Swedish Mountain. I'm sorry, Sweden. Sweden. I'm sorry.
That's
Everybody, she is from Sweden. The company's from Sweden. Petra,
and we thank
please.
the Swedish mountains. No,
Swedish,
yeah.
yeah.
So we actually our main office is in Östersund, Sweden. So it's about 600 kilometers north of Stockholm. Or if you take Sweden and fold it in half, it's right in the middle, the same latitude as Nome in Alaska. So
Mhm,
we're up there. So when we go out, our home mountains, which are basically, you can be in the mountains a half hour away from the office. Um, and our tree border is, because it's Arctic. Our tree border is at about 100 or 150 meters. So we come above tree border very fast. So that's also why we know weather. we
mhm,
we know weather changes, and we know wind, and we know snow, and we know rain, but also still sun and warm. But so yeah, so we do a lot of um, staff trips just with our staff. And we also, my dad is always, so the company was started 53 years ago by my parents. So my dad was
mhm,
a forester, and he didn't like any of the tents that were on the market. So he started making his own. And then he was lucky enough to meet my mom in Austria. And she didn't know how to sew, but she figured out how to sew, and she learned how to sew. And then also she figured out, which is amazing, how to set up a whole production facility. And that's still how we operate our factory. And so she did that with no experience of doing it. So it's pretty amazing. So he would draw his like kind of the ideas on a piece of paper, and then she'd look at it and she said, no, it's impossible. And then like 2 days later she'd have it made. So that was kind of the process that they had in making new tents up until my mom retired maybe 15 years ago now. So it's pretty amazing. So so the whole basis of the company has always been that we make tents that we use ourselves, and
mhm,
that we know that our best friends are using, and that we know that our friends and customers and partners are out in, and that a lot of them or a lot of us put their lives into the tents, like where
mhm,
you are, like, there's consequences that can happen when you are out
mhm.
in remote areas. So that's always been so to kind of to show how we work, and we're just using the tents. We've always been bringing out retailers in the mountains as well. And so we needed a group shelter that we could sit in at night. And that's when our mom then made the Altai. And it was just something that we were using for ourselves. And then the retailers were like, if you don't start selling it soon, we really need it. So then we put it to market. But yeah, so we still use it. So we'll use our individual tents. If we go on a staff trip or something, we'll use our individual tents to sleep in, and then we gather in the Altai at night. But you can also sleep in it and use it as an option like that.
Yeah, and the reason why I brought that up and seeing you guys do this stuff is people often ask me like, "How do you think of this stuff? How do you make such great tripods?" And I always answer because I'm using them. I'm just selfishly building myself things if people
Exactly.
want to buy them. It's like I'm always constantly improving my stuff and making changes to my stuff because it's for me and what I like. And then a byproduct of that is people want that same product, right? I think that's how the best products are made. And you guys are out there doing it and doing it in the most extreme places to prove it. So you're not going to make a product that is insufficient for your needs. And it's how important is it to you guys that you guys are out there using them?
Oh, I think it's really, really crucial. I think that's um, why we know details the way we do it. So, like when we test a new model, it's not about, some companies they'll send a sketch to China and then have it made. That's a whole different thing. And then they will bolt it into a cement floor and put a wind machine on it, and do a wind reading and say, oh, it can stand up to this much wind, which is a completely arbitrary number, because you're never going to bolt it down into a cement floor, right? So what we do when we have a new model, we will first of all, so we do lab tests. So we work with the university in our hometown, where we can do lab tests on materials. And then we also do field tests on materials. And then when we have a new model, we will go out and like set it up and use it over and over and over, because it's when you set up, take it down, use it, you eat in it, you have lunch, you do all those things. That's when you see kind of the details and figure things out. And then we have a wind machine. We actually have one both here in my backyard here in outside of Seattle, and we have one at the office in Sweden. And what we do is we turn the wind machine on. So it's a steady stream. It's a remade snow cannon. So full wind blast. And then we go in front of it and start setting up the tent. So we set up the tent to make sure that you can set up. We have a philosophy that each tent should be able to be set up by one person in the dark, in a storm, wearing gloves. So that goes for each model, because that's also important when you're out, right? That you have
Very
to be able
important.
to set it up. So we set it up in the wind machine, and then we let it sit in the wind machine in very strong. So basically at storm, which is like 32 meters per second minimum. And then we start looking at wear points. So like, where are there some abrasion points? Is the guy line attachment in the right place? All those things. Is this webbing tensioner working the way it should be? Is it long enough? Is it short enough? So all that. So that's kind of how we do development, to make sure that every little detail is on the right spot.
Yeah. One thing you guys said, I listened to you on Aaron's podcast, the Cafaro cast, and you're talking about how you guys will not use reflective paracord.
Well, so we haven't found one that we really like enough yet. We have one that we sell as an addition, that is fairly good. But what we've done instead is put reflectors on the tents, because
Mhm.
when you have your headlamp on, especially with a reflective cord, unless you hit it at the exact right angle, they're not going to light up.
Mhm.
Whereas the reflectors that are sewn onto the tent, they're gonna reflect no matter what the angle is. So that's the main reason why we don't have that.
Oh, I thought for some reason it was abrasive.
That is also the the reflective cords that are popular on the market, that I see a lot of people replace our guidelines to, are very, very sharp, and they will wear through the guideline attachments.
Yeah, I never had noticed that until you said it, and then now I'm like, oh, I don't want to use those because you can feel it almost like little
Very
blades in
sharp.
there when you pull on it.
Yeah.
And the reason I bring that up is because most companies don't care about that because most companies are like fair weather, like we're going to test to this, and you guys are testing to such an extreme condition
Yeah.
that you know that hey, that at when you're getting 60-mile-per-hour winds for a sustained amount of time, you might have your guy lines tear right through your tent.
Yeah, exactly. So then there's, and most things work for most people
Hmm.
in most weathers. So we always kind of have the philosophy. It's like my dad always says, you always want to anchor your tent fully. It's like you anchor your boat as if a storm is coming. You do it
Yes.
every time you anchor a boat, just automatically. And for us, it's the same thing with the tent. We always put all the guidelines out, because you never know what the weather is going to do.
Hmm.
If you're in a camping spot where you have complete protection and there's not going to be any wind, it's a different story, right? But then we have the guidelines on there. They're attached to the tent in advance, so that it is there in case you need it. That's also our system where we have the inner and outer tent attached to each other, um, rather than the inner tent going up first and then you're putting the fly on top.
Here, 1 second, Petra. I'm gonna pause this.
So that's also why our tents are a little bit different, why the inner and outer tents are one unit and they go up together. Because if you set up the inner tent first and then you have to put the fly on top, if it's raining, everything gets wet.
Hmm.
And we that was kind of the main thing that my dad wanted to solve when he first started making tents. He wanted to have tents that where the inner and the outer tent, or the inner and the fly, go up together.
Hmm.
So that was the thing he wanted to solve. And he had lots of different variations, like he had foam and like all kinds of things in between. but then came up with this where the inner tent and the outer tent, so the inner tent is suspended from the outer tent, so the poles are on the outer tent or on the fly, because that way everything goes up together. And the inner tent is attached with shock cords and toggles. So when you set it up, it all goes up together. But you can also then, if you want, take the inner tent out. Or like
Mhm.
if you like for you when you have your Nalo 2 and you wish you had the GT version, you can always detach the inner tent by that front pole and just move it back. And then you still have your own little kind of GT vestibule that you can deal with gear and things like that. For search and rescue or like a emergency situation, it's also good because you can take the inner tent completely out, and then just if you have a person laying on the ground that you need to protect, you can put the outer tent on top of that person. So and you can use the outer tent by itself. Some people do that to save weight. The outer tent by itself is not going to be as comfortable because it's not breathable. But if you're just looking for a minimalistic shelter that is light, you can do that. Same thing if you're in a desert or a really hot, dry environment, you can use the inner tent by itself. So you have a lot more flexibility.
Gotcha. Yeah, I saw the guys over at EXO running your stuff this year in Alaska with just the outer shell.
Yeah,
It's like a tarp style.
yeah.
But
And
for
there's some
me,
companies that do that as for like their gathering space with their clients and like cooking space, kind of or like eating space in
Mhm.
some areas where you can do that. So yeah, that's an option.
So I think it's important to talk about, if people don't know Hilleberg, talk about the design of the tent because your tent's unique and you guys have stayed true to it. That's something, one thing I love about your company is like I always refer to like In-N-Out Burger. Do you guys have In-N-Out Burger in Washington?
We actually don't. I think there's one that just opened, but not in the Seattle area yet.
Have you been to In-N-Out before?
I have.
Okay, so In-N-Out makes really good burgers, and that's it. Like they make a burger, you can get it with a single patty, double patty, triple patty, four. You actually go 16 by if you wanted to. I don't know if you know that. It's a SoCal company, so you can have as many as you want. But it's the same burger. And
Yeah,
they do that really well. They don't throw in chicken sandwiches. They don't throw in burritos like Carl's Jr., whatever. They make a really good burger.
yeah.
And they stay true to it. And you guys do the same thing with your tent. You make a really good tent. Now you do have some variations now aside from the tunnel, but let's talk about the tunnel because you guys have stayed true to that design for 53 years. What makes your tents different?
Well, so the for a lot of people that are not used to seeing the tunnel tent, that's obviously different. So, like I talked about, the inner and outer tent going up together and being connected, but separable.
Mhm.
That's different. So having the poles on the outer tent, but also the poles they're in sleeves, especially on the tunnel tent, that are raised off the outer tent fabric. So say that you have a really really bad situation where you have a failure of a pole, which is usually if it's a bad storm, that's going to be like the worst case scenario is that the pole breaks. That pole is going to only go through the pole sleeve. It's not going to touch the main body. So you still have three layers of fabric: the inner tent, the outer tent, and the pole sleeve material between you and a pole breakage. So then what you could do is just duct tape the pole sleeve and duct tape the pole, and you can continue on your trip. So
Mhm.
it's not a catastrophic failure. So in the tunnel tent, like you said, they're tube style with either one vestibule or two vestibules. We always again make the tents for the amount of people, including their gear. So, like you said, the Nala 2 actually feels like a two-person tent. It's a tight two-person, but it's still a two-person tent. So the tunnel tent will always give you the best weight to space ratio. So so I was about 12 years old when I said I told my dad I was gonna sell tents in the U.S. And he said, "Yes, of course you are." Uh, but so I ended up going to college and then starting a company. And when I first started, like other people in the industry would tell me that, "Oh, well, there's no point. Americans will never buy tunnel tents. We've tried it. There's no point. It's not going to work." And we were small enough, and I was, I figured that it doesn't matter where you are in the world. The needs are the same when we're out in the elements.
Mhm.
Right? It doesn't matter whether you're in Korea or Sweden or US or anywhere. The needs are the same when you're out in the elements. And so the tunnel tent will always give you the best weight to space ratio, and that's why they're so popular. Like you get a lot of space for less weight because how they minimize the pole usage.
Hmm.
And so some people think, oh, it's hard to set them up, but you need a minimum of 4 pegs to set them up.
What is going on with this camera? I might have to just unplug this thing real quick and see if I can get it to.
Yeah.
Here, hold on.
Yeah, so I was 12 years old when I told my dad that I was going to sell tents in the US. So he's like, yeah, of course you are. But actually, no, I'd already talked about it. Okay, sorry. I'd already talked about
Whatever,
it.
keep going. It's fine.
But yes, everyone was saying that you're not going to be able to sell tunnel tents in the US because we've tried it, it's not going to work, etc. But to set up a tunnel tent, you need a minimum of 4 pegs. So you need 2 at the one end, and you lift it up and pull it out, and then 2 on the other end. So it's a very, very easy setup. And that's why they're pretty much standard on North and South Pole expeditions because it's such a quick setup. So 2 back, 2, and then obviously, yes, then you peg out all the other peg points, but it's a very quick setup. So even on our dome tents that are completely freestanding, including the vestibules, we still peg them out. Like we would never rely on just the gear holding a tent down because if you do, the wind is going to start picking up the poles and it can ruin the tent. So you always want to peg down the tent. So, and obviously we were right. Even Americans figured out that the tunnel tents really are they are really good when it comes to the weight and the space, the amount of space that you get for lesser weight.
Yeah, so if you guys don't understand, it's basically a tube. So, like Petra said, you're going to stake out the back of the tent, and then I'm going to put my poles in, like whatever 2 or 3 poles, depending on the tent, and then I'm just going to pull that thing out like an accordion, and then stake the front down.
Yeah.
It's such a simple design, and then I stake out my vestibule, and it's pretty much standing then, and then I'm going to stake out a few more points, and then pull my guys out, and my tent's up.
Yeah.
I've said this before on the podcast. Tents are so important. Like I recommend setting them up 4 or 5 times before you go out. And
Yes.
if it's been sitting in your shed for 2 or 3 years, set it up before you go out because you're going to forget how to do it. And like Petra said, can you do it at midnight with gloves on when it's raining and cold out? Because that's when it really starts to suck. So I think with any tent, it's important. I think once you use a Hilleberg a few times, you'll get the hang of it and you'll understand it. But set them up. But it's a very simple design to set up once you get the hang of it.
Exactly. And I think the pulling it out and like getting a stretch of the ridge line is the key. I see some people are really upset with their tunnel tents and they're like, oh, they move and they don't stand up and they don't hold up the snow. But 99% of the time, it's because it's not set up well enough. You need to have a good stretch of the ridgeline, which is super easy to do because we also have adjustable peg attachments, so you
Mhm.
can tighten it. So you set it up, and then you can tighten it. So you really like when it comes to that ridgeline, you can tighten it as much as you want straight across, and that's what's going to hold up. Against wind and things like again we have them in the wind machine from every direction like people oh, you can't take side wind. Yes it can. Like we've had side winds where maybe like you'll even have the poles in your face going up like this, but they're designed to move with the wind, kind of that catastrophic damage that you talked about where a tent blows apart. What usually happens is that some tents are so stiff that they fight against the wind and fight against the wind, and then it explodes. So
Mhm.
even in our dome tents, we build in some flex so that they're going to move with the wind. So that's by design to hold up longer. But a tunnel tent that's set up correctly with a good stretch of the ridgeline and then the guy lines out can stand up to pretty much any wind.
So people often tell me like, "Oh, your tripods aren't the lightest," and I
Mhm.
say, "Well, they're very light, but they're also very stable." And my goal is stability, not ultralight. I could go and make a 12-ounce tripod right now, but it wouldn't be stable. So why doesn't Hilleberg come out with like a 2-pound tent?
Well, it's the same thing that we don't do flimsy.
Okay.
Um, we could also do that, but we don't do flimsy. Like again, on every detail, even our lightest yellow label tents, we do put them through the wind machine and all those tests. So there are details, and again, we go over every little detail. And on the yellow label or the lighter tents, it becomes even more important. Like you might shorten a zipper this much, it makes a difference. And then, like, but we don't compromise on the stability. So the Honoris is a good example. It's a really cool tent we came out with a few years ago. It's kind of a new version of one of our original, the first tent that we had, the Keb. So it's called the Honoris, and it's a ridge tent for two, and it's really roomy, and like you can do all kinds of cool figurations with the outer tent. So you can use it as a tarp, as a Florida shelter, and like but also have the inner tent. So you can do a lot of cool stuff with it, and it's light. It's the pack weight is 3 pounds for a roomy two person, but when we were making it, so it has it. You use it usually with trekking poles. You can also use a pole, but a trekking pole that has this glove that keeps the top of the trekking pole in place. And if you look at that tent, it has a pretty burly glove to keep the trekking pole in place. And it's if you look at it, you'd say it's over designed, it's way too big. But we tried so many different versions in lighter materials and shorter versions. But every time, as soon as we put the wind on a little bit, it would tip over. So we couldn't make it in a lighter version. So it's every detail again is there to hold up. So yes, we could make a 2 pound. We could make something super ultra light, but again, we don't do flimsy. If you look at some of or pretty much all the super ultra light, they have 4 millimeter zippers. We would never put that in a tent. They're not going to hold up. Their zippers in themselves are a nightmare, and having them that light, they don't work. You're gonna wear them for one trip or a couple of seasons. Like they don't work.
Yeah,
The same
especially
with materials.
when you cut the tent into it, you zip your tent up into one of those small zippers, it's just done.
Yeah,
Once you accidentally which you're going to do at 2 in the morning, you're gonna get in your tent and accidentally zip your fabric up, it just happens.
yeah,
But with a good zipper, it won't derail and it won't bend. With a
yeah,
small zipper, it's gonna bend, and then you're out there with a door open in the rain.
yeah, yeah. No, and the same, like I said, with the pole, we tried a lighter pole, and the difference um, in lost performance or compared to the slightly thicker pole, and then comparing that to the weight was not worth it to us. So
Mhm.
there's other companies that do other solutions and have other philosophies on that. We just don't.
Yeah, and again, if you guys are just listening, you never have one of these tents, their poles are thicker. Like it's noticeably like, oh wow, this pole is substantially thicker than my other pole, or substantially larger than my other pole. So a lot of companies will try and do is these super thin poles. And like I have multiple tents here that came with like aluminum poles that are bent to like all heck. They're like crooked as a dog's leg because they've just been just getting torn up in the wind and get
Yeah,
pushed around, and your poles aren't going to do that, and it's just so worth it to have that weight. Um, I think we should test.
yeah.
So
I
one
was
thing,
gonna
oh, go
say
ahead.
our poles can bend if it's a really strong wind, but then there's sections, and they're all the sections are the same length, so it's very easy to replace a section if there is a problem. So that's, but it's not gonna fail the tent because again, the even on the domes, the poles are away from the fabric, so you're never gonna have a full breakage like that.
So when you say strong wind, miles per hour, when you say your strong wind's different than these other people's strong winds and the REI tents. Your strong wind is what, 70?
Well, that's our working strength. That's just kind of
That's where you get started.
well, it's kind of where we sit for hours.
At
Uh,
70 miles per hour. So let's
yeah,
understand that. So like this is the level. Like I want you to go take your Big Agnes Tiger Wall, which is a cool tent, and go put it in 40 mile per hour winds for an hour, let alone 70 mile per hour winds. Because that's what happens when you're up in Colorado at 12,000 feet of elevation on an elk hunt, right? Or it's just that's what it goes down. We're not gonna have video for the rest of this. That's fine. It just keeps cutting out. I don't know what's something wrong with my camera. So that's what's gonna happen. You're going to have things fail. And Hilleberg is like, we're gonna put it in there at 70 miles per hour and let it sustain and
yeah,
see how it goes. And
yeah,
that's why I trust my life to Hilleberg. That's why, and I say that like truthfully, like when I'm going on a hunt and I know that I'm gonna like there's gonna be like I want to have a Hilleberg, 'cause I know I'm gonna be safe.
yeah. Yes, exactly, and that's our goal. That's always our goal, that that people feel that way.
Now let's talk about like kind of like not maybe not vestibules. So I guess your tents are all built into itself. So you have the outer wall of the tent and the inner wall of the tent, and water's not getting in. A lot of these tents you're going to buy REI tents. I'm calling them REI or other tents. That's a two-piece design, and wind is going to get in there. Rain is going to get in there, and they're actually going to honestly kind of be almost like a kite to pick wind up. That's kind of one of the issues I found with some of those tents is that it's actually going to pick wind up. Um, your tents don't do that. They go all the way to the ground, and you have these great vestibules on there. Um, why are they not two piece?
So again, like we said, like you don't want to have to set up one unit and then have that wet while you put the other one on. So that's like you said, like the vestibules are integrated. So we're two different styles. So the tunnel styles, they all have their vestibule integrated. Then you have to peg them down with the four pegs, and then we have both self-supporting and fully freestanding tent. So to us, a fully freestanding tent, that it's fully freestanding. You can pick it up without pegs, including the vestibule. So we have like our Styka, Solo, Alec models. They can all be basically picked up and like find a new spot and then peg it down, including the vestibule. So including two vestibules on the Alec and the Styka. So also really convenient if you prefer a dome. Um, and what we do again, so on a traditional tent, you would put up the inner tent, peg that down, and put the fly on top. So even with our dome tents, everything goes up at once. So if it is really, really stormy, you can peg the bottom, all the bottom corners, and then just slowly, then you put the poles in and you feed them over the sleeves, and then the tent just clips up to it. So you never have to be flopping around, like you said, with a big kite flying around in the wind. So everything can stay really low and stay close to the ground. That's the same with the tunnel tents. You peg the back end and you can stay low and pull the tent out and get it up. So it's always a very secure setup. So again, with the domes, you just build them up and they're stable. So then like I said, we have the fully freestanding and then the self-supporting domes where you have the body and then a vestibule that you peg out. But again, it's still one unit. You just have to put a peg in to get those. And that's going to save a little bit of weight. So you have in the yellow label, two really cool tents that have that, the Rogan and the Niak. Those have the vestibules that you peg out.
I love when I hear you say the names because I've been calling it Nyack forever. Like I never say it
Well,
right.
that's fine. I thought it was a Niak.
Nyack. Okay, so it's important for me to say them right. So another thing I never appreciated it until started running Hillebergs was your vestibules. And you go out on a hunt and you've got your rifle, your backpack, your tripod, your optics, your stove, whatever, and you're in one of these small tents. It's like, where does that go?
Yeah.
If you don't have a tarp, it's out in the elements, or you're pitching a tarp for it to be out of the elements. With yours, you have these giant vestibules in the front, especially the GT. Like if you're
JTs.
listening to this, buy the GT. If you're buying a Hilleberg, it's the best. Um, and it's almost like a second tent. Like on my Namaj, it's almost like a sec. I can actually go sit up in the front of that and sit there. And like if it was raining, I can have the front door open on the vestibule,
Yeah.
and still sit in there and do my stuff, cook, put a little chair in there, whatever it is. So I'm able to have like one of my big things with like floored tents that kind of sinks is it's hard to you can't cook inside of them. But with your tents, your head is on that end of the vestibule or end of the tent and the vestibule is giant.
Hmm.
Cook right there in your tent still and eat in your tent and do that stuff. So has it always been a thing with you guys having these giant vestibules?
Yeah, so the Caron GT came out probably late 80s. So yeah, we've always had, because again, we use them ourselves, and my brother and I were young, and so my parents, and we were out all the time, and we had a dog, and we had
Yeah.
the kids and like all the things. So yeah, that was also a need that was filled because we needed it. But so we have so GT basically just means extended vestibule. So there's a number of the tunnel tents, the Anyan, Nalo, Kaitum, Namach, and Caron that have this extended vestibule. We also have two big dome tents, the Saivo and the Citrus. They also have extended vestibules. It just gives you one vestibule that has a lot of room, which for any hunter is obviously very convenient. The one thing that is to keep in mind is the vestibules are not, you will have condensation in the vestibule because it doesn't have a like the breathable liner like the inner tent to
Mhm.
protect it. So you don't want to have your expensive camera gear or rifle uncovered in there. Like if there's something you want protected, you want to cover it a little bit in the vestibule, but you can sit there and deal with your gear and do everything away from the weather, which is huge.
And I've truck camped with my Namaj
Yeah.
and put my kids in the vestibule. Be like, "Hey,
Yeah,
sleep here." Like, you could put a 8-year-old boy in the vestibule. It's big enough to do
for
it,
sure.
and you have all that room in there to do it. So there's a lot of room
Right?
for activities.
In a Caron 4 GT or even more the Saivo 4 in that big vestibule, you can put a couple of people out there for sure.
Yeah. Now, I'm interested in getting a one-person Hilleberg at some point.
Yeah.
Um, Sell me on a one person. Which one do you like? Which one should I get? Which one's going to be the best for me as a hunter to hold my pack? You know what I'm running.
Yeah. So our most popular tent is actually still the Acto. It is
Yeah.
our lightest one person all season tent, and it has been kind of since we brought it out in early 90s, I think. So that is very popular with the hunters as well because of the weight. So it's an all season tent. The pack weight, so including everything that how you get it from us, is 3 pounds 12 ounces. Um, if you're doing um, more kind of extremer stuff, the solo is a good option. So you get a little bit more weight, but you have three poles. It's a dome style, and that's also very popular. If you want to go light and comfortable, my pick nowadays is the Niak. So that is actually it's technically a two-person tent. It's wide enough for two, but it only has one vestibule. So and you lay parallel. You sleep parallel with the vestibule. So technically, with two, one person has to step over the other person to get out. Um, which so it's more for a like if you bring your big hunting buddy, I probably wouldn't have a NIAC.
Hmm.
But if you're bringing your wife or your kid, it's perfect. But so you have the option of taking it for two, but it's really roomy and then it has a vestibule that you pick out, and pack weight 3 pounds 15 ounces. So that's really nice. And then the Ianan, which is the yellow label version, so the three season technically version of the Acto is the Ianan. Pack weight is 2 pounds 10 ounces. Same kind of design as the Acto, but a little bit lighter. So that's not super helpful. And then actually also then the Una is also popular. It's the only tent we have that does not have a true vestibule, but the inner tent instead is really large. So what you do is you detach a corner of the inner tent and fold that to the side. You still have your vestibule, and then you have a larger inner tent. So some people like that because of the inner tent space. But the Acto, the Niac, probably the more popular is although in a I'm not super
You're not
helpful.
helping me. You're not helping us at
They're
all.
all my babies, so I can't pick a favorite, you know?
The Acto is the one I like. 'Cause the Acto is still a tunnel design, correct? Single,
It's
single,
a
single
tunnel
pull.
hybrid, yeah, single pole, and then you have these rods at the end,
Yeah.
so you stake out the ends. So that's again why you get a fair amount of space for the lower weight like that.
Oh, it has two rods on the ends to get. That's how you get that foot room.
Exactly. So you have
Oh,
a
I
little
never
bit
even
more
realized
space
that.
for your head. Yeah. So that's a very popular. Also, like I think that a lot of people always think that they have to go out hunting with their buddy and sleep in the same tent. But I think that's why the Acta took off so much when we first introduced it because you don't have to sleep with someone. You can have your own space. So you can have two
Yeah,
Actas out and you have your own tent.
yeah. It
I
is
think
nice to
it's
share
important.
weight. It is nice to be able to
But you can do that with
split
other
it.
things. You can do it with the
Yeah.
cooking gear and things like that.
Yes.
If you have it
Yes.
right, and like sleeping is so important when you're out on a trip. So if you
Yes.
don't sleep well when you're crammed up to some other dude, then
Especially
that's
if they're snoring. If they're
well,
snorers, like
yeah.
my
There's all
my
kinds of things.
partner is a snorer, and we spent like I think we spent like
Yeah,
8 days in your tents, and
yeah,
he snored the whole time.
And then you can do that in a really polite way. You can just like, oh, you don't have to say I don't want to sleep with you. You can just say, oh, I'm taking my Acto, so I have my own.
So yeah, so actor your way out of here and go get your own tent. Um,
Exactly.
so let's touch on stoves because
Yeah.
there's a big push in the hunting industry for stoves. I've even seen some people put stoves into your vestibules. Um, do you guys have any plans of working with stoves? Are you looking at stoves? What do you think about them? Your vestibule's big enough for a stove.
Yeah. Um, we yeah, we get the question a lot, and I know that there's some people that have put it into the Altai, put a chimney out of there. I feel like in the smaller tents, it's very. I mean, my coldest night in the tent. Well, we stopped looking at the temperatures 5 p.m. and it was 40 below, and it was still dropping. Um, I'm not going to say I was warm that night; it was cold, but it's still. I never. I don't know. Stoves are. It's extra weight. You need to bring
Mhm.
fuel. There's a lot of extra stuff, so it's not really the category we're in. You can obviously still use it, and I know some people that use, that go with snowmobiles and things like that. That'd like to have it. Um, there's a lot of legal issues, I feel like, with stoves. There's the liability issues on flammability on fabrics and things like that with the stove. So it's there's you need to get more non flammable materials around it. So then you add more weight, and you also have to cut things up in the fabric, which makes it weaker. I'm not going to say never, but it would probably be, if anything, it'd be focused on the larger, like in the Altai or something like that. Probably not for the smaller tents, I'd say.
Like I can imagine my Nalo with a GT with the stove jack in it, and I think that would just be a killer tent for hunters. I think they'd go crazy for it.
Yeah.
With a small, like I just picked up the new Go Hunt. I know you guys saw on Go Hunt. I picked up Go Hunt's stove, their little one, and it's like,
Hmm.
man, this would be kind of nice inside my my Hilleberg.
Yeah. I mean, again, there are lots of options.
But also, your tents are so warm that I've never really felt like I needed it.
Yeah,
Well,
and I
I
think
can say that. I'm just saying because I know people like there's a big push in hunting to go to stoves. Everybody wants to run a stove now. Um,
yeah, but I think that also it kind of goes a little bit against the weight thing. You
yeah, it
know,
does.
like, yes, they're light for sure, but they also get really hot, right? At least the ones I've been, maybe there's some new ones that don't get so hot, but they get very hot. So it's tricky um, with the chimneys and stuff like that through the lightweight fabrics.
I got you.
So, like
So,
Mallow, that is such a lightweight tent. I can see going with a Karen 4 GT if you're car camping, or again snowmobiling or something like that, or like the Citrus or Saivo or the larger tent, something like that. I mean, um, but it's not something we're into right now, for sure.
gotcha. I just wanted to ask the question,
Yeah.
and I can say that I've never seen these teepees on Everest, and I've seen your tents. I've never seen these teepees on the North Pole, and I've seen your tents on the North Pole.
Yes.
So it is warmer, and I often leave the teepees at home and bring your tent because it's just more comfortable for me, even with a stove, to have your tent. So if you don't ever do stoves, I understand. I was just asking it.
Yeah, no, and it's a fair
Yeah,
question. There's a lot of people that ask it.
I'm sure you're
It's
getting asked it a
there
lot.
are yeah, there's a lot of issues that come with it. I think that, or a lot of technical things that come with it that right now, we'll see. Who knows? We'll never say never.
That's good. So that's all the answer I need. So we typically end with a hunting story, but
Hmm.
you are not a hunter, but you
I
do have
love
you love hunting. You love hunters. You're not an anti-hunter. You love hunting. You have
Absolutely not. No, I am a big supporter of legal and ethical hunting for sure, and the hunting community is such a great community. We do a lot with conservation and things like that, and I think that the hunting community obviously is um, the biggest supporter of conservation. So so we do a lot with hunters and have a lot of hunting friends. It's just hasn't been an opportunity yet, so we'll see. One of these days, I'll go out.
so with that, we end with a hunting story. Let's end with a mountaineering story, or not mountaineering, or whatever, an expedition story from you. Give us a good story. It doesn't have to be like the craziest hunt or not craziest expedition. It could just be like one of your favorites. Give us a story of taking Hilleberg out and just working and doing his job and
Yeah,
you
I
being
have
thankful.
so many of them. I think that the one that was so cold was is kind of a funny one. We had so we were in Sweden, and it was my dad, my brother, and a retailer, and my husband was. We were going, and it was in December, or yeah, right between Christmas and New Year's, and we had planned on it to be cold, but not super cold, and it was really cold already when we started. And we had a big atlas in one of our group tents with a stove, actually, that we were testing, that failed after a little bit. Um, so that one stopped working very fast. We also had like two little mini stoves that were both stopped working. We had one finally that worked because it was so cold. And we at that time in Sweden, in the winter, you have to basically stop around 2 o'clock because it's so dark. So from like 2, 3 o'clock after you set up the tents, you're sitting, and again, it's the temperature's dropping, and it was really cold. And but we had a good time, and then and but the worst thing was that my husband was writing for an outdoor magazine at the time, and he was doing this clothing testing, and he had set up a clothing system that both me and my dad were trying out. So normally my dad would be in all his down layers, and we're trying this clothing system, and it was like just a lot of thinner layers. So it's kind of like the new military clothing system, and it was really cold. And again, like I said, like around I think 7 p.m. we looked at the temperature, and it was still dropping, and it was 40 below, and that's where Celsius and Fahrenheit meet. And I went to bed, and I've never been so cold in my life. And we woke up in the morning, and my dad was like, "I've never been so cold in my entire life." And because we were both in fairly thin sleeping bags because of this clothing system that we were testing, because we also sleeping with your clothes and you had like a thin sleeping bag, and it was just misery. And I woke up in the morning, and everyone, even like the retailers and my brother who had slept in the very, very like 40 below bags, they were like, "Yep, we're going home." So I don't know how cold it got that night, but we were. I was in a llano and slept inside the sled. So we'd had sleds that we pulled behind us and put that inside the tent. So it was a very cold night, and I was awake all night because it was so cold. But it was still a really, really nice night. So that was kind of a fun memory. That was some years ago.
So I'm curious. I know we're going to wrap up right now. It's a great podcast. I want to know about your sleep system because you said 40 below bags. What bags are you running? Because like I tend to, like I really like Enlightened equipment. I like Feathered Friends. Some of these brands who hunters aren't really familiar with, but are more expedition style.
Yeah, so you
Um,
use Feathered Friends for the really cold bags.
do you?
And I think my dad had a Western Mountaineering bag.
Richard Mountaineering, another one that's really good. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually, for my most of my regular tours, I use a Montbell sleeping bag that I like. It has the elastic in it. So you, rather than being so cocooned, you can kind of stretch out in it.
Hmm.
So like you can pick your legs out to the side and things like that. So like I like that sleeping bag because of how the stretch. So that's I have three different weights in that one that I like.
Do you not run quilts at all? Have you
I
run tried
actually
quilts?
don't like. Yeah, I've tried them. I don't like them. I like to be kind of wrapped in, but I see a lot of value in them. So, but I'm usually a little colder. I like sleeping bags, but I like them with stretch.
I'm a roller, so I love quilts. Like I don't think I'll ever go back to a sleeping bag. I just feel so like I get rolled up and then I twist myself up like a wet blanket.
Yeah, that I don't
Um,
like. Yeah,
so I like you talking about Western Mountaineering. It's a phenomenal brand.
yeah, they're
Um,
amazing.
and same thing with Feathered Friends. Now, what do you run for a pad for something like that cold?
So for pad when it's cold, we always have a foam pad. as well as a ridge rest, or something from Cascade Designs. So, but I've always in the winter have a foam pad that can't explode or lose its air. So like a solid foam, and then like some kind of air, usually from Cascade.
That way
Um,
you don't have an issue with it losing air and then you're now laying on the ground and
Yeah, in
losing
case
air.
that happens, because that can, again, that can be pretty much life threatening if you're out and you lose all your, if you only have air and there's no down in there, and you lose that and it's really cold, that can be pretty severe.
Now, what about I'm sorry, I know we're supposed to wrap up.
It's okay.
Have you been to the North Pole?
I have not been to North Pole, no.
Yeah, I've been there. Okay.
It's something about the ice opening up and like floating backwards while you sleep, or like in polar bears. There's a lot of issues on the North Pole that I think are very scary. And then who knows how many expeditions can go to the. I don't know that they can go anymore because of the. You can go the last degree. You can't go any longer because of how much open water there is now.
Because it's snowing and stuff. Yeah, I know I've seen your stuff up there. But I know that if I was going, I'd be bringing your tent because you guys
Yes.
make the tent for going to the North Pole. So if I ever go to Antarctica, North Pole, Everest, don't really have a desire to do Everest.
But
Um,
also, if you just go in your local forest at home, where you want to
Local
have.
forest. I use it locally in San Diego. I've used your tents, and believe it or not, last year we had like sustained winds, like 50, 60 miles per hour, like for 4 or 5 hours, and your tent saved my butt.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So
It
it doesn't
used
matter
to be
where you
that
are.
that's awesome. It used to be that people, that our customer was usually someone who'd had like 4 or 5 tents before, but now we're seeing more and more people who want to invest in quality in their first tent. So kind of like, yes, it's a higher sticker price at the beginning, but you want to invest in that quality because like you can, if you take care of it, you can hand it to your grandchildren, and I think that kind of is important. Also, like just out of a financial and a sustainability aspect, that you're taking care of, like you're making something that lasts. I think that that is important.
They are worth every penny, Petra. I am so thankful for you coming on the podcast. I want to do it again. I am a fan of Hilleberg. I will continue to buy them because I love tents and I want a single person. Thank you
Thank you
so
so much.
much for
Thank
coming on.